Hello and welcome, guys, to another episode of OnReviewCast. I'm your host, Ash, and here we do the weekly go-to review for TV shows, movies, and all things media. On review today is Barry Season 2. It's going to be something epic. It's just a continuation. So here's On Review, Barry Season 2.
H.B.O. series, Barry, Season
2. So, something that we forgot to do in the last podcast, I think, is we forgot to essentially create a lead off as to what was happening like last time. So, but just to do a little bit of recap towards the end of the season, NoHo Hank was essentially negotiating with one of the main gangsters and was one of the main mobsters, I should say. I'm forgetting his name. I'm just gonna look up his name real quick for the characters. So it's the main guy that's there for that's there for before Hank, and I keep forgetting his name. I was trying to remember his name in the last podcast too, but I can't remember his name. I know in the comments you guys are gonna be like, oh, his name is blah blah, but I'm just gonna actually look it up real quick. So Goran, Bizarre Goran. Yeah, so he was just basically negotiating with this, and like I want to say like around like definitely episode 8 of season 1, still season 1. We know we're doing season 2 here, but around episode 8 is where things kind of shift in terms of like tone, and this is where the scene I was talking about like last time happens, where Fuchs basically comes over, and Fuchs is basically being a dick, and he decides to basically give Barry over to the Chechens, basically to serve him up, because he feels like for whatever reason, him and Barry basically him and Barry are essentially fighting. That's what it is, and this comes into the play of the whole building, the whole that thing that basically holds people in the olden days. That's what I was talking about, and that's basically like what happens there. So just to break down basically everything that happens in season 1 is like towards like the last episode. So Janice is basically something we forgot to mention in the first season towards the end. So the big finale of this was that basically the Ryan, the initial guy that he was going to basically go and murder, was basically set up and to believe to be connecting with this mafia. And Taylor, the guy that we mentioned from the last season too, they suspected him to be a part of the whole gang thing too, to be involved in the mafia too. So they basically took the blame for all of Barry's shenanigans, going into that place, killing all those people inside of the stash house. Basically Orion takes the blame of it. And NoHo Hank, just the hilarious character Victor Zaz, they gave it to Zaz, the hilarious character that he is, basically meets up with the Colombian mafia head, which is Cristobal, and they decide to make essentially an alliance. That's where season 8 essentially leaves off. And season 1 episode 8. It's essentially where season 1 episode 8 basically leaves off. So that's just a little bit of a recap on there. And towards the end of that last episode, what happens is that they meet up in this, like, it's so funny because Sally is the one who Barry's looking to basically leave after him and Fuchs have a falling out. And like, I think in the first couple of seconds of the episode, Fuchs basically punches Barry And Barry basically punches Fuse in the face, and he's like, I'm fucking done with you. That's it. Oh, it's over. I'm done with you starting now. And he storms out of the room, and I think that's what basically sparks Fuchs to want to get basically revenge on Barry, which is completely idiotic in my opinion, because he ends up saving him in the end, like I explained in the last episode, right? But yeah, the main essential thing I think that we essentially forgot to mention was the fact that they do a kind of like a time jump in this last episode. So because Sally goes from hinting towards this person who she used to be, or this person that she used to be basically involved with, that we learn is it's a character, Sam. And Sam essentially, we get delved deep into season 2 of her past and her involvement with Sam, and what we learned that during this particular bar scene that she was married once, and he was basically not the greatest of partners. But yeah. She basically convinces him to stay because of a play that they essentially want to do, and then they do a time skip of essentially where they're at this log cabin, and Gene, their Mr. Kusno, Gene Kusno, their acting teacher invites them up to basically have like a couples weekend with him and Janice. Janice is the cop essentially, and it seems like for the most part everything is like like all everybody's it's all a good time until Mr. Kusno starts remembering essentially the first time they met. Him and Barry, that is the first time him and Barry met, and Barry had told him the story about how he was an Afghani soldier, and that's when the wheels start to turn for Janice, and she starts thinking that wait a minute, he's in the army, and this whole thing was most likely done like from an inside job from an army's perspective, and she's kind of like wait a minute, putting 2 and 2 together. And it's funny, like Barry, while they're having dinner and while they're discussing it, she starts bringing it up. The wheels start to turn in her head, but I think she knew that he might know, and he might starts to suspect that he starts to think, basically, you can kind of see it on his face, basically starts to think that, hey, wait a minute, like what if she knows, so the gears start to turn a little bit on that, but like she quickly changes the subject, and the tension kind of changes and shifts where so you kind of think like, oh, okay, well, she didn't really put 2 and 2 together. But later on, we know that's certainly, we found that that's not to be the truth, because she goes out into the woods with her laptop, and they have Wi-Fi on the grounds or whatever, and she starts searching up the guy that Barry had shot dead in season 1, and found out that basically that him and Taylor were friends through Facebook. Fucking Facebook, right? I know, guys. Anyway, so that's how it happens, and it's just a matter. It astounds me to this day how much trouble Facebook can provide people. This is why I mean hey, you can still go on OnReviewCast of media at Facebook and like us and view all of our things, but I mean, if you want to get away with murder, maybe don't be on Facebook. I'm just saying. I'm kidding, but murder is bad in general, guys. Don't do that. Anyway, yeah, so it's this epic showdown scene that happens between Barry and Janice, and this is what I'm talking about in terms of like, when going through this, couldn't necessarily believe that he was necessarily like a bad person. I don't think that Barry generally, or I can't believe that, and it's up for debatable, like was he generally a bad person, or was he genuinely good or bad? You guys, let me know in the comments, like, or let me know on Twitter exactly what you think about Barry through his progression through this entire series. The big question is he inherently bad, or is he inherently good? I think he's a very complex character, but I don't necessarily think it's as easy as that. And even as easy as black or white, because I see someone who's basically trapped, who wants to, who has been manipulated and brainwashed into being so much things from his choice and from his perspective, from his choice and from his choices. That's what I should say. I see someone who is being manipulated and stared away from his choices to so many degrees that, I mean, yeah, he had a choice at the end of the day, but from what I understand, he was in the army, and it's just, that kind of personality basically brainwashes a person. It makes them think on a level of which, you feel like you have to do certain things. And it's basically, it's kind of, I mean, you can't help but feel it's kind of sad for it. But through this entire sequence, Janice basically confronts Barry, and she is dead set on bringing him in. But Barry's like, no, like, it's okay, we can just walk away from this. Let's walk away from this. And Janice is kind of like, no, it's done. Like, and she specifically said, it's done, Barry. Like, I'm a cop, you're a bad guy, I'm taking you in. And the cinematography of this and the way they do it, I mean, he's such a clever guy. Obviously, like, he planned for this. He's probably thinking, like, she probably most likely won't go for this, like, realistically. So it's so fucking kind of like ingenious of him. He plants a gun on a tree that holds it up, and essentially it is there. It's his insurance policy, and he tries to convince her one more time, but sadly, nope. And they do a hard cut away from that scene and back to where Sally's basically sleeping in the cabin, and we see flashes of the muzzle gun go off, and Barry walks back inside of the room, and just like how he tells Fuchs, like, if he's done with him, he's done with killing, he's done with all that stuff, we're starting right now. He tells himself that he's done with it right now, and it's almost like he's trying to, like, convince himself of it. Again, like, it's kind of like sad. Like, he's been, and I'm not making excuses for it or excuses for him. It's just like I feel like he's trying to, like, fight for his freedom, and almost kind of, he's trying to fight for his freedom, and almost in kind of way he's trying to fight against that initial brainwashing of what he had. So that basically ends season 1. I know this is supposed to be about season 2. So jumping straight ahead into season 2, it picks up right off where season 1, with Cristobal and Hank basically being in the same place of where they're getting together. And I just gotta mention, though, that opening scene for season 2, oh my god. And when the guy comes into this random place and he just basically starts blasting away at everybody, and then the second guy he like misses, that was great. Because it's like, okay, like, what the hell. But later on we find out that this guy is essentially this new guy, this random guy from the camera's taken from this perspective, is essentially like this is essentially the guy that this is the guy who Fuchs is hired. And basically, if you remember that Barry last season, previously I just finished talking about, Barry and Fuchs were basically having a falling out. They didn't want to be involved with one another anymore. But this new guy that he's hired, like, he sucks. And it's just so funny because he has, like, the entire, how Barry is kind of like, when Barry commits his kills, he's very, and if you've seen the show by now, you're on season 2, or you just finished up season 2 like us guys, or like me, I should say, sorry. Yeah, if you just finished up season 2 just like me, you would see that Barry, and through his kills, he's very methodical, and he's very he's almost very, like, aloof about it. He's very, like, the kill happens, he doesn't make a big show, he's because he's trying to basically get away with it. But this guy brought the cops, he alerted all kind of people to Fuchs's front door, and basically got Fuchs caught and arrested because of him, essentially. But yeah, So this is how essentially like season 2 starts, and it starts off with a kind of a somber note that, you know, Janice is now passed away and Kusno is essentially a wreck, and he's ready to basically like give up. Like, he's essentially ready to give up on basically the acting, and he wants to close the acting school. But Barry and his students are basically essentially like trying to like say like, no, don't close it because it gives them purpose and all this other stuff or whatever it is. And so Kusno comes out with the great idea that, well, not a great idea, but he feels like he wants to have like a connection with his students. So he's kind of like, well, he starts asking Barry about the war, and he's like, tell us about the first man you first killed or whatever. And he goes on to essentially like tell the story of how he first took out the first guy, and you think it's gonna be like a whole entire like somber kind of moment, but like randomly these two students inside of the acting class start acting out the play, and it's just weird. It's weird all around, and but at the same time like pretty friggin' hilarious as well. But yeah, somehow he convinces Kusno to keep the acting class essentially open, and yeah, there's the main meats and beats of that first episode. But like the thing is, right, so this entire time Noho Hank, you think would be essentially like not out of the story. They found a way to like keep him relevant and involved in the story, which is honestly like it's great. I don't think they had to try too hard, like, because his character was so iconic, and like again, Victor Zsasz energy, right? Like he is it's basically so iconic and so great to his acting abilities. So the problem is, like I mentioned before, Cristobal and Hank are having this like, they're great, right? Like having this good relationship or whatever, and they've become like really really close until Esther is basically Esther is essentially introduced to Hank, and basically Hank starts to become like super duper like jealous, and he basically shows up to Esther's like this rival gangster, but he shows up to where he works in the Lululemon store, and he shows up with a wig. And I don't know if you guys know this about like the actor that plays Hank, but he's like bald. He's like naturally bald. So he it just looked like, and he's like, he has this blonde like Justin Bieber wig on. It's hilarious. And he's like, it's me, it's Hank. And Barry's like, I fucking know it's you, Hank. it's that little like great exchange there was so like funny. It was just so great. Yeah, honestly, so great. Yeah, and then but like I was saying, like we start to see something interesting that happens. I think that's really interesting that happens in the season. Hank, and I started to slowly make the comparison of it. Hank initially approaches Barry inside of his store to basically to get him to kill Esther, right? So he's trying to recruit to kill Esther, but Barry basically doesn't want to do it. And the thing is, while Barry wants a life away from, you know, the killing and all this other stuff, and he doesn't want to be a hitman anymore, he tells him this inside of the store, and Noho Hank basically gets his feelings hurt. But towards the end of the episode, Noho Hank shows back up, but the mood is completely changed. It is more tense and it's more tense, and the gravitas of what he's saying is definitely felt way more than when he initially than his normal like goofy happy-go-lucky character. Like we slowly see, I think it becomes a little bit more apparent like throughout the season, but we slowly see a darker side of Hank, and it was almost kind of like uneasy to kind of watch. But yeah, So, and also in the season um we had some basically 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 we had some of the theme of like exposing your truth. Because after Janice dies, like I explained it, like the way that Barry tries to push Mr. Kuzno to get like back on the acting scene is to essentially he says like you got to work through it, you got to work through the pain or whatever, you got to work through getting through this traumatic loss that you went through. And then that's when Mr. Kuzno basically counters with, well, tell us about the first man you killed or whatever. And then everyone inside of the acting class decides to be like, oh, okay, like let's just talk about our pain basically inside of it, which is and some of them have truly ridiculous truly ridiculous pain stories. Like I think there was one guy that said that I think that his dad was I think like a superhero or something like that. That's why he was never around or something like that. It's honestly it's just kind of sad. Well, his mom told him that his dad was like a superhero or whatever, and that's basically kind of sad. And then I think there was just like everybody was just trying their best to express themselves within this class, or to tell their greatest pain. And it's funny because like a lot of their pain wasn't really like it wasn't really that dramatic. I think like another one was like a girl was saying like she had never seen a horse before or whatever it is, and she was trying to explain it. She's like, oh, I grew up in the city, I never seen a horse before. You gotta understand, guys, it's truly emotional, imaginative thing, a beautiful thing that I've never seen a horse before. And it's just like that kind of like essentially like that ridiculous kind of humor throughout. Something of note that also happens in this season is that Sally's acting career, though, like really starts to shine, and we really start to see a more how the dynamic of between Sally and Barry essentially works. And we get introduced to Jean's son. So that was we get a little bit more expansion on these characters and their background or whatever it is, essentially. But something I really, really want to get to essentially talk about is the fact, is the whole story of basically Sally and her background and the things that she's basically went through, and her drives within this season, I guess I want to say. But before that though, something that I thought was just like absolutely like really funny throughout the season is that like Hank, so basically Hank is so Barry, so wait, so I gotta set this up, so try to explain this a little bit properly. So what happened is that Hank basically threatens Barry, right? And he's kind of like, Barry, you're gonna do this thing for me. Like I said, like towards like the first episode or whatever, he really, really puts the pressure on Barry to essentially try to kill Esther, and he essentially goes inside of they all lived in this monastery. Esther lived in this monastery, and the monastery was full of monks. Because of her religious beliefs, she had connections. She was able to do some drug smuggling. But anyway, Barry essentially meets Esther in this monastery, and he finds her and he's gonna kill her. But essentially, and something that was really funny was essentially that he goes inside of the monastery and he's gonna kill her, but he had second thoughts, right? He's hesitant. and he says, and he had the perfect shot, the perfect time to basically like take her out, but he says no, and he walks, and he hears people coming down the hall or whatever it is, and he enters the room, another room. He enters another room that doesn't have Esther in it, and it's filled with guys, filled with armored guys, or armed guys or whatever, and they all like stare at him because they're all just like chilling and relaxing, and it's just so funny because he stares at them, he stares at his gun, and he stares back at them, and he just leaves. And he just like leaves, and he's just like, I'm out of here, and he just goes. And after he walks away. He walks away, and he walks away, and he essentially says that he's not going to do it. He tries to run away, and he tries to get out of there, and the entire time they're like shooting at him, and they fuck up this car. They like basically straight up destroy this car that he was driving to basically to basically get away. And the thing is, so he didn't pull off the hit, and NoHo Hank essentially gets told that Esther was attacked by Cristobal, and comes up with a brilliant idea, or that he's got to kill Barry to basically keep everything all hush hush. But the thing is, Barry is a armored soldier, and as NoHo Hank has said, as NoHo Hank's guys, by the way, NoHo Hank has said before, his guys suck. His guys suck balls or whatever, because they try to murder Barry from the rooftop into his apartment, and they try to snipe him, and it basically doesn't work, and Barry is able to like they suck so bad, able to like shoot them back and snipe them back, or whatever it is. And it's just so funny because the entire time Sally's like in the kitchen taking a call or interview or whatever it is, and Barry sneaks out and confronts Frank, and he's like, no, Hank, and he's like, yo, what the fuck? Why are you trying to like murder me or whatever it is? And he's like, well, you didn't commit the hit, so I basically had to kill the messenger. And Hank, it's why this show it works so well. It's perfect elements of like dark humor. It's basically dark humor. It's humorous because the entire time, like Barry and Hank are confronting one another, and they're talking in the background. They're kind of like the entire time that's happening, the guys on the floor like moaning and groaning or whatever. It's like, oh my arm, and then Hank's like, oh, you're fine, no, you're fine. He's like kicking it. He's like, okay, you're fine. But yeah. So at this point in the podcast, guys, I want to take a quick break to say that don't forget to essentially follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the socials on the On Review podcast. Really enjoy doing this. And guys, if you want to keep the conversation going and want to be a part of the conversation, don't forget to support me on Patreon as well. Every little bit helps the podcast, helps us keep going, talk about some of our latest and greatest TV shows, movies, and all things media on review. Thanks. So, but yeah, getting back into this. Essentially like getting back into this. It's pretty funny because like Hank tries to essentially stand up to Barry, and he's kind of like, you know what? He's like, you know what? If this is the way it's gonna be, you might as well kill me now, because once they find out that Esther, I tried to kill Esther, Christopher finds out I tried to kill Esther, they're just gonna kill me too anyway. And Barry's just like about to shoot him, and Barry basically doesn't do it. He's like, I can't do it. And no Hank in his relief is like, oh my god, and he starts dancing like this Russian dance, like this it's great. It's so great. And he agrees to essentially he offers to, and Hank agrees to basically essentially train their guys in how to shoot guns, and basically how to be soldiers, how to be an army, essentially. And this entire time Barry is just like struggling with this whole role of, you know, expressing himself on stage of his first kill. But yeah, so now I think it's a perfect time to start to talk about the whole Sally thing. Sally, in this season, Sally really comes into her own. Honestly, like, they expand upon her story so much, and it's essentially so great. The love story between Barry and Sally, it's okay, but the individual, essentially the individual expansion on her character is so great. So I think it's around episode 3 where it's like towards the end of the episode, Sally is basically trying to reenact everything that the scene with Barry of exposing her truth, which is basically that her truth was that Sally had I can't believe this, but Sally had been abused by her, or was being abused by her ex-husband for a really, really long time, and she's bullying Barry on stage to basically get him to do the scene. And Barry's basically like, no, I don't want to hit you, I don't want to hurt you, I don't want to do the seed with you, or whatever it is. And it gets to be so frustrating that Barry basically storms out, and Sally chases after him. And essentially what happens is, when they go outside, Sam, her ex-husband, is there. And it's like, I was stunned. You know what I mean? I was stunned. And I mean, like, it's essentially no words. I mean, and man, like, at the time I could only imagine, you know what I mean? Like, and Barry's an assassin, he's a killer. And through this entire thing, I'm saying to myself, man, I understand, like, you're like a murderer or whatever it is, like you're an assassin or you're a killer or whatever it is, and he must be feeling like he just got like take this guy out just like that. But essentially that's not what happens quite yet, or at all, really. But what happens is that they end up going to dinner, and it's just funny that this entire interaction, I wonder to myself, like, is this? I started to question. It's in a sad, and I know it's not. And then I know that the whole woke thing is kind of like believe all women or whatever it is, and you should believe women in general. But like, I started to like, just because, like, you know, they went out to dinner with him, and he seemed like a relatively pleasant guy, but you never really know, like, and that's fair. Like, you never really know who's a piece of shit, right? You know, you don't know who's a piece of shit, or who's just a horrible person, or who's a woman beater, or whatever, or what have you. You never really know. You don't really know until it actually starts happening or whatever. But yeah, like, you don't really know. But what it just confused me, I guess, was kind of like, why did they allow themselves to go to dinner with this dude? Like, I don't understand. Like, that's why I was confused. Like, I was kind of feeling less confident. I was starting to feel a little less confident about her validity of the story that she was creating about him, because the entire play, or whole entire truth, is essentially that, oh, this guy, you know, choked me, he beat me, he hurt me, or whatever it is. But here you are having a nice, pleasant, like, dinner with him, or whatever it is. And, like, mind you, the dinner itself is very awkward. It's very awkward or whatever. And Barry is clearly closed off, but Sally seems very complicit and very smiley and very submissive still to Sam. And I can't imagine, or I can't begin to understand the traumatic turmoils of an abusive relationship, because I've never really been in one myself. But why the fuck would you go? Like, you know what I mean? Why would you go? Why would you even agree to that, or whatever it is? Why would you even entertain that shit? And then towards the end of why would you put him through that? Why the fuck would you put him through that? Why the fuck would you put Barry through that? It's such an awkward situation. Don't you think he wants to rip this guy's head off? Like, what the fuck? Like, and then towards the end, he tries to like shake his hand towards the end, and Barry's a man who's killed people for far less. I'm just saying. I definitely felt, and I felt as the audience, if you've definitely, because this is like one of the main things in season 2, and you've definitely felt that surge of tension of like, what the fuck, during that entire like interaction, during that entire weird interaction. And I know that the directors and writers, they set it up that way, but holy fuck, if there was ever a time to just kind of like, you know, man, I felt it, definitely felt it. And Barry's frustration at the situation obviously like carries throughout, but like this story, season 2, we start to see some real like development and, like I said, expansion of characters within this. But that just didn't make any sense. But and it didn't make so much, and it didn't make so much sense as well. So much so that Barry even asked, you know, what the fuck? You were being all cool with this dude, like, what happened? Like, why? I thought this was the man who abused you, who hurt you. You didn't want to deal with him, or whatever it is. And Sally basically essentially reveals that she was kind of like, she was basically submissive to him. Like, he beat the shit out of her, or whatever it is. She choked her, or whatever. But he didn't. And her story was basically essentially like, oh, he stood up to her. But that's not really what happened. What happened was that she snuck away in the night, and she didn't really stand up to him. She snuck away in the night, and she stayed at a friend's house, and she tried to essentially walk away from him. And it's fine. I mean, again, I've never been like a victim of like trauma or whatever it is, and to that degree with a partner or whatever it is. But something that really bothered me. That really bothered me in the season. I was kind of like, why? Why would you even entertain this motherfucker? And then like something else that happens within the season too, and that like that also kind of bothers me too. So she has dinner with this motherfucker, right? She has dinner with this motherfucker, and and the next day happens, or the next scene happens, or whatever it is, and she's practicing her monologue for essentially what happens between her and Sam, right? So she's on stage, she's practicing this monologue or whatever it is, and Barry's essentially like watching her. Barry's a part of the class. Barry's essentially was working with Mr. Kusno to work out his own shit as well. So he just happened to be there. He just happened to see Sally. But then in the fucking background, we see, who is it? It's fucking Sam. This is when I was kind of like, okay, like, this dude's a little bit fucked. This is a little bit weird, like, or whatever it is. And basically, Barry chases him, essentially, he chases him out of the acting class. And he essentially chases him out of the acting class. And he just says some really rude, misogynistic, gross shit to him, like about how he had it first or whatever, or he had it when it was tight or something, or some shit like that. And it just the fucking grossness of it, just astounding. And at this point, you feel, and I know, hopefully this doesn't sound too like a misogynistic man myself, but as a man, when another man disrespects you that way and says that shit, you can feel the rage in this man's face. You can only imagine the rage in this man's face. Like how the fuck dare you? Who the fuck do you think you are? And it's Barry. I'm just some dude. I'm just some dude who doesn't murder people. But Barry kills people, dude. I can only imagine like his intensity or his desire for wanting to end this man is so great. And then, and then continue on. the fucked up thing is like, we see several minutes later, Sally gets a phone call. Who is it? It's fucking Sam. And then she ignores it. The first one, she ignores it. Starts to ring again. This time, don't remember, Sally and Barry are in a fucking relationship. So the phone rings. She hangs it up. Phone rings again. She sees it's Sam. She picks up the phone. Why the fuck would you do that? Why? Why the fuck would you do that? Why would you pick up? Don't pick up. Just don't pick up. Block that shit. Why do you have his number? Like that. Also, it's kind of fucked, right? It's again, like, let me know, guys, please, in the comments. Like, were you? I definitely felt like, is any of what she's saying true? And maybe it was. I want to know if it was just me. Like, do we believe everything that Sally is saying, or is it just like? Because this really bothered me. I was like, well, what the fuck? Why is she putting up with this shit? And then they start to talk, and Sam's like, oh, come over to my hotel, and I'm automatically red flagged. I'm like, no, and he's like, let's just meet in the lobby. And of course, this motherfucker knows that the lobby is gonna be closed or whatever. And he's like, and she calls him back, and she's like, the lobby's closed. And Sam's like, oh yeah, just come into my room. Now, guys, what do you think's gonna happen? Like, realistically, what do you think is gonna happen? My point is, the thing I think that really bothers me is not the fact that, like, Sam is doing, and the fact that what's bothering me is, yeah, he's a piece of shit for doing this shit. But why the fuck is she going? Why? And this entire time, Barry's like hot on the heels of this shit, ready to lock and load, take this motherfucker out. And if there was ever a motherfucker, I know he's trying to get out of the killing game, but if there was ever a motherfucker who deserved this shit, who rightfully deserved it, I guess, who I guess in the audience eyes for sure, like, murder is wrong, but like in the audience eyes would have been like somewhat justified, it would probably be this guy, right? Because at this point, like, he's doing like a lot of sketchy shit. You start to, because it's just weird, because like at this point, I don't know what to believe. I believe a little bit of A, I believe a little bit of B, I believe a little bit of Sally, and I believe a little bit of, he's obviously doing some sketchy, weird shit right now. So maybe a little bit of her story, maybe a little bit of out of his story, because his story was basically like, no, it didn't happen. He was denying all this shit, and he was basically upset that the fact that it was gonna ruin his name, it was gonna ruin his reputation, because he had a wife and kids now, Sam, basically. But I mean, all these characteristics at point that, yes, he is a piece of shit, though. So this was, for me, this was the most frustrating thing in the season. So essentially, Barry is essentially right behind Sally, getting ready to shoot this guy. And through some quick angles and through some quick movements, he avoids detection basically from Sally and Sam. And he doesn't go through with the murder. He really can tell that, again, like, he really, really wanted to. And just as she's leaving, and Sam is basically yelling and hitting things in the room, Barry sees this shit and he backs off because he wasn't expecting to see Sally there. But just that, I just didn't understand her choices. You know, sometimes people make choices or whatever, and I guess I could relate to that, honestly. Like, people just, like, why would you put yourself in a situation that you know is kind of like fucked? And yeah, either way, Barry continues to struggle with telling the story of the first time he murdered someone. Well, actually, no. The story he tells Jean the story of essentially how he saved Albert's life. And Albert was his friend in the army. He got shot in the face. He blamed the wrong people. He murdered some people. It's a horrible, disastrous thing. In the meantime, Fuchs is basically working with the police now, because Fuchs had essentially being caught, and he had been caught, and he was facing maybe some years, and he's trying to make a deal with the police, and the detective Loach, Janice's partner, essentially was trying to set Barry up or get Barry on videotape to they both were trying to get that right to confess to her murder and basically all this stuff. And essentially they are able to get him to admit it, and Loach was gonna take him out. Um, and instead of Barry basically I think Loach pulls a gun on Barry, and he essentially says that, you know, like, it's fine if it's fine if you do what you got to do. And he's basically essentially getting ready to like give up and basically accept death or accept incarceration or whatever it is. And Loach essentially reveals to him that, hey, like, I would like you to murder this guy. And toward the end of the episode, Barry's just like, what? And it's just it's the perfect setup. And then after that, I gotta talk about this during the season, man. The best episode, the best episode of season 2 is essentially where they go and essentially I think it's probably gotta be like the funniest episode ever too. So Loach essentially tells Barry to murder this guy who his wife is being sleeping with or whatever, or his ex-wife is being sleeping with. And Barry essentially goes to this guy's house and meets and basically tries to introduce him, because we got to remember, like, Barry doesn't want to kill anymore. He doesn't want to be a murderer anymore or whatever it is. And Barry comes up to him and he just basically explains the situation. He's kind of like, okay, look, like, do you have family anywhere? He's like, yeah, Chicago. He's like, yeah, great, I love Chicago. You see that guy out there? He basically wants to kill you. He just basically calmly tries to tell him it or whatever it is. But little does Barry know, well, I mean, essentially, he's dressed in a ski mask and shades, which is fucking hilarious, by the way. Just the way he was dressed, he's not dressed like how he knows. He's not dressed like how he's ready to commit a murder. He's just like he's ready to basically commit a robbery and not a murder. And essentially, Barry kind of tells him that, like, okay, well, we're gonna have to get you to go to this family in Chicago because, you know, this guy wants you dead, etc., etc. And something that's just so funny, he's like, you have a bag? And he points to the next room. He goes inside of the next room and he walks in the room and he's like, he looks behind him, he's like, shit. And he's like, you're a taekwondo master, huh? And then he turns around and he's like, oh, I didn't know that you were one. And then Anita basically turns around and he says the medals, like, oh shit, you got medals too. Damn. And the room is full of trophies. And like Barry, like, I feel like some red flags for me basically essentially went off to say, like, hey, you know, this fucking guy's, he's gonna put up a fight. Like, I don't care like what kind of guy you are. I mean, I don't care what kind of how complacent like someone might seem or whatever, like that should have been a big red flag to be like, hey, like, this guy's he's got some fight in him, right? He's gonna basically fight back. So of course they basically start fighting, and Barry essentially like hits him in the throat, thinking that he like broke his windpipe and that he's done, it's over. And it's just so great. He he said he starts because the guy starts wheezing and he passes out, and Barry thinks that he's essentially he thinks that he's dead, and he thinks that it's over, and he begins to walk out. He begins to walk away. And I don't know why he took off his mask. So he takes off his mask and he walks towards the door, and a little girl walks in the door, and you're thinking, oh fuck, right? You're thinking, oh fuck, because the girl now has seen his face, and like he goes to like basically essentially like leave, and Barry turns back around. And he's kind of like, little girl, and we're all thinking as like, oh shit, he's gonna have to murder this girl, and he tries to follow her into the next room. He's looking for her essentially. He finds an open window, thinking that she's gone away, but she hasn't gone away. She hasn't gone away, and she starts making these growling sort of sounds like a fucking ferret. She's like, "Argh." And oh man! And apparently this girl is trained. Let me tell you, she is trained. She's crawling around like Sly Cooper, fucking throwing stuff at him, attacking him, and she like stabs him with a fucking knife at one point. And Man, this is the greatest episode, and it gets to the point where Barry is basically hovering in the corner, trying to huddle in the corner, almost in the fetal position, afraid for her to basically attack again, and she's just and she's just fucking ready to go, and she starts crying. Man, the she just starts randomly crying, and she walks out the door, just fucking forgetting about Barry, ignoring Barry completely. She fucking walks out the door, and Barry looks at the window, and she like runs off into like the neighbors, like over the neighbor's fence, and she just like runs off into the neighbor's yards, and she like, I shit you not, like does a front flip over like some hedges or whatever, and she just like fucks off, and Barry's like, what the fuck? It's just great. It's great. And this demon like little girl is gone now. And Barry basically is trying to tell Fuchs like, hey man, like I need a hospital, And Fuchs is like, oh, he got you. You got this really good. He got you really good, huh? And he's like, yeah, no. He's like, nah, man, I need stitches or whatever it is. And then and then he's like, okay, I'm gonna patch you up, man. He's like, I'm gonna patch you up. And then he tries to basically clean the stab wound that's on his back. And he's like, oh, there you go, whatever. He's like, oh, what the fuck is that? He's like, it's glue. It's like, it's super glue. It's gonna just seal the cut right up or whatever it is. Fuchs being the douchebag that he is, essentially, not giving a shit about Barry. And he's like, oh, he got you pretty good, huh? He's like, no, it wasn't him. It was his daughter or whatever. And he's like, and he immediately stops everything. And he puts on the bottle. He's like, well, Fuchs, what are you doing? He's like, we gotta go. We gotta go kill her. We gotta go kill her right now. We're gonna go kill her. we gotta kill a little girl. I'm sorry, we gotta kill a kid. I was like, and he's like, no, Fuchs, I need a hospital or whatever it is. But they find the little girl. And then essentially what happens is, again, this girl is feral. This girl is feral. She's like running through the running up trees and running up on top of houses. I think like this is essentially crazy or whatever. It got to be essentially so crazy that the little girl hops on top of the car and basically bites Fuchs' face off. This, like, again, she's nice. She's not nice. She's nuts. She bites Fuchs' half of her cheek off. She acts like a wild animal going on top of roofs or whatever it is. And I think it's getting to the point where she runs off and they're like, fuck it, whatever, forget about her. We need to fix my face or whatever it is. So they go back to the drugstore, and who was at the fucking drugstore? The first guy from the first scene whose windpipe they thought they broke. Just absolutely ridiculous. And the Barry's like, oh shit, or whatever it is. And he starts telling him that he was the guy from his house or whatever it is, and in the most stupid, idiotic way. And they start to get into a fight inside of the store, and he's doing all these swift action kicks or whatever it is, essentially just trying to kick Barry's ass. And Fuchs essentially sees this, and Fuchs is like, fuck this, I'm getting out of here. But as he's backing up, the police car he runs into a police car, and he's like, oh shit or whatever, and he runs into the police car just as it's coming up, and and then he pulls off to essentially try to escape and leave Barry to fend for himself. So Barry's like fighting with this guy, and the police come, like I said, and the detective Loach confronts the guy. He's like, freeze or whatever it is, and he shoots him a couple of times, and the guy goes down, and he's like, okay, well, it's kind of like, okay, well, that the problem took care of itself, right? He was able to shoot him and take care of his wife's fiance or whatever it is, and he goes to shoot Barry, but the fucking guy he shot gets back up. The Taekwondo master gets back up and ends up fucking killing Loach, and but with one swift kick to the head, one swift roundhouse kick, and it essentially kills him, and he gets shot, and he dies. The Taekwondo master, he gets shot to death, and leaving enough time for Barry to basically get the fuck out of there. And man, this episode was crazy. this is probably the best episode inside of the entire season. This episode was crazy, and he meets Fuchs towards the end. He's like, Fuchs is like, come on, like get in the car or whatever it is. And at that moment, there's like two things that's running through my mind or whatever. And it's kind of like all that crazy shit you just went through, all that bullshit. You really want to like, like Fuchs like throws him the look. He's like, come on, get back in the car so I can manipulate you. And that's kind of like, do you really want to, all that shit you just went through, do you not see how this is not a sustainable like lifestyle? Like what the fuck, man? Like Fuchs obviously not good for you. He's not a good character. He's not a judge character, not a good judge character. He's tried to murder you several times despite you saving his ass. Man, it's just, it's just crazy. Anyway, guys, season 2 of Barry. This is just some of the crazy things and some of my favorite moments. I think from season 2 of Barry. What else did I think I wanted to talk about? Oh right. Towards the end of season 2, Fuchs again, being the jackass that he is, exposes actually how much of a dick do you have to do. Actually ruins a man's life. And he gets Jean to essentially come out to where Barry had stored the murder. Barry had stored the body of Janice, and Mr. Kusno goes out there, and Fuchs essentially shows him the body of Janice, and this man has a dramatic breakdown. So yeah, Fuchs basically becomes a huge ass dick this season, I thought that it's brilliant writing, but like, I mean, like, geez, like, all because he had this petty vendetta of essentially Barry is basically telling him that like he was out of moves. He didn't have a hold on him. He didn't want to be he wouldn't want to be subservient to Fuchs essentially anymore. And that spirals a whole large thing. And just for the last thing, I got to talk about, guys, the monastery scene. Holy shit, that was like a scene out of that movie. What's that called? What movie was it called? The Gentleman, or something like. I think it was like with that church scene where that guy like murders everybody or whatever it is. It's essentially like that. And an entire monastery, Barry loses his fucking mind. And it all pops off from when Esther like essentially like recognizes him. And Esther and Fuchs basically tries to seek refuge with these guys, which is kind of like fucked. But Barry basically goes ham on these dudes, and it's so funny too. Like after because the Chechens and the other gangs essentially were fighting, and they were not being friends, but they made up. And then again, like after what Fuchs did to Mr. Kusno, he goes essentially ham trying to hunt down Fuchs. And the Fuchs in the monastery is basically filled with Chechen soldiers, Colombian soldiers, and the monastery soldiers. He just mows them down, and this was like horrific, but also shows his character going to even more darker depths into it, and even into more darker depths of who he wants to be. So it's essentially this struggle of him wanting to get out of his old habits, but we can see like literally like him losing himself in the anger, him losing himself in the violence that is basically of how he used to be. It's just so great. And then towards the end of it all, Noho Hank just essentially has that line of when he meets Batir, and he's like, "Hi, Batir," and Batir basically assumes that Noho Hank has killed the monastery monks gang and the Colombian gang as well. And essentially the season ends with Mr. Kusno finding out that Barry is responsible for Janice's murder. And essentially because, again, Fuchs told him, and Fuchs basically ruined everything. What a season. A great season. Real highlight moments. But I think I'm just gonna leave it off there, guys. Yeah, and everything just came together in this in this, and it left off of the basically the cliffhanger of like, well, what's gonna happen now in season 3 of Barry? Essentially, what's gonna happen with the with the fact that Jean knows, you know, what Barry did, and the fact that Fuchs got away, by the way, and Fuchs was in the monastery. They're chasing that. He mowed down these guys just to try to get the Fuchs, killing all these guys, and essentially Fuchs got away. And how they're gonna handle the situation with Fuchs is what we're gonna hopefully look forward to see for season 3. So yeah, guys, this has been On Review with Ash. This has been On Review with Ash for season 2 of Barry, and let's go to the score, the screen score. What's the screen score or the On Review score? I'm gonna call it the On Review score. What's the On Review score for Barry?
On review, Barry, season 2 receives a 5 out of 5.
Thanks again, guys, for coming out to the podcast. Really appreciate it. Remember to follow all our socials: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's Twitter at OnReviewCast. See basically what we would, or to express how you feel about season 2, and to basically interact with us. Let's get this like conversation kind of started, kind of going about the different medias that we are reviewing. It's gonna be pretty good, I think, season 3. And tell me what you guys thought about season 2. Like, was it good? Like, would you, even if it's eons later and you're listening to this, let me know what you think about season 2, Barry, and what do you think, and which basically you thought about season 3. And if you have any questions, essentially for me or the cast, essentially, if you want to put basically out there, definitely feel free to reach out to us and ask this question on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All right, guys. I think that's definitely, like I said, gonna do it for the podcast. Thanks to, and basically also, hey, wait, before I go, guys, remember to support the Patreon. It really does help. Every little bit helps, and right now we should have a page basically up. Yeah, hopefully these will be good moving forward. The audio should be awesome. And lastly, just to sign off, guys, remember, be safe, be kind, be you. Take care.